Hi, in our previous tutorial, we used 3D control points to position the panoramas correctly inside the 3D model of this villa. And this gave us smooth transitions from the model to a panorama and when switching between panoramas. And there's still a problem we want to solve. When we move from one of the poolside panoramas to a panorama on the other side of the villa, the camera flies straight through the building. And the same thing happens when we return to the model node. So, to avoid this, we need a way to guide the camera around corners, through doorways, and over buildings. And that's where camera points come in. So, in this tutorial, we'll create connections between camera points to control the routes taken during transitions. We briefly introduced camera points in the previous tutorial. The position of a panorama inside a 3D model is represented and stored as a camera point. So when we switch the viewer to camera points mode, we can see the positions of all the panoramas in the tour. These are tour node camera points. And in the viewer, the camera symbols show the position and the orientation of each panorama. There's also a special camera point for the default view of the 3D model node. And it's colored cyan, making it easy to distinguish from the other camera points. And later, I'll show you how this camera point can be used. Also notice that camera points are represented in the list view. When you move your mouse over an item in the list, the corresponding camera point is highlighted in yellow in the viewer, along with the node it represents in the Tor browser. And the same works in reverse. Move the mouse over a node in the Tor browser, and its camera point is highlighted in the viewer and in list view. Now let's fix a transition between panoramas on opposite sides of the building. And we'll start with the poolside lounge panorama and connect it to the panorama at the top of the stairs. So first, I'll select the camera point I want to connect from. Then I'll switch to link mode, or you can press 4 on the keyboard. And now that button is highlighted, telling us that link mode is active. To create the connection, I'll select the camera point at the top of the stairs, and this red line shows the new connection and tells us that it's currently active. And active connections are drawn above everything else. To see more clearly where this connection passes through the model, I'll deselect it by double-clicking an empty area of the viewer. And as you can see, the connection passes straight through the building. So we need to add a point that guides the camera around the corner. First, I'll select the connection to make it active again, and then I'll double-click the dot in the center of the line. This creates a new camera point and splits the original connection into two sections. The new camera point is a waypoint, and it appears as a dot in the viewer and is also added to the list view. Now I can move the waypoint into a position that guides the camera around the building instead of through it. And let's create the output and see what we have so far. I'll begin at the poolside lounge panorama and select the hotspot for the kitchen entrance panorama. And the camera now travels around the corner and up the stairs instead of passing through the walls. And notice that the camera moves through the waypoint along a smooth curve. You generally don't need to add multiple waypoints just to create a curved path around an obstacle. But the visible connections in the editor don't show the exact motion path. The camera follows a curved path through the waypoints rather than the straight lines we see here. So this means the camera could still clip through a wall, even when the connections themselves appear to avoid it. So don't forget to always check the output and adjust the waypoint positions if needed. So far, we've only corrected the transition between the poolside lounge and kitchen entrance panoramas. The other tour nodes aren't connected yet, so when there's no route between two camera points, Pano2VR is going to take the direct path, which might go through the model. So let's go back and continue adding connections. I'll turn on link mode again and continue from the camera point we last selected. And when I select the camera point for the patio panorama, a connection is created and that camera point becomes active. I can now continue selecting camera points to build the route. And once we reach the back parking panorama, I'll demonstrate a common mistake that can happen in link mode. So let's say I want to continue with the panoramas around the pool. If I just select one of them, Pano2VR creates a connection from the back parking camera point because link mode is still active. And that's not the connection I wanted. So here are a few useful link mode shortcuts. To delete a connection from the active camera point, Option click it on macOS or Alt click it on Windows. And you can also select the connection itself and just hit delete. To move to another camera point without creating a connection, Command click it on macOS or Control click it on Windows. And this lets you change the active point while remaining in link mode. Okay, let's continue building the network and making sure that transitions between the panoramas avoid the model. Some of the poolside panoramas aren't connected yet, and I want them to behave as a group. They should all use the same route as the poolside lounge panorama, moving around the corner and up the stairs towards the kitchen entrance panorama. To group camera points that share the same connections, we can use a cluster point. There are a few ways to create one. For example, I could split the connection from the poolside lounge camera point by double-clicking its center handle. Or I can create a new camera point by double-clicking the model and then change its type to cluster point. I'll move it slightly above the poolside panorama so it's easier to see. And cluster points appear as octahedrons in the viewer, making them easy to distinguish from waypoints. With the link mode active, I'll connect each of the poolside camera points to the cluster point, and then I'll connect the cluster point to the waypoint at the bottom of the stairs. All of these panoramas now share the same route to the rest of the camera point network. The cluster point is an organizational tool used by the pathfinding system. It lets several camera points share the same connections without requiring us to create every connection individually. And its position doesn't affect the camera path. For example, let's say we move from the pergola terrace panorama to a panorama behind the house. The system sees that pergola terrace camera point is connected to the waypoint at the bottom of the stairs through the cluster point. But the camera doesn't fly up to the cluster point and then back down. It moves directly toward the waypoint as though each poolside panorama had its own direct connection to it. Okay, let's check out the output again and move between some tour nodes. And it looks good. The transitions now follow the routes we created, but there's one problem. When we move between the 3D model node and either the two panoramas behind the house, the camera still passes through the model. And this is where that default view camera point becomes useful. First, I'll group the two panoramas behind the house by double-clicking the center handle of the connection between them and change the new camera point to a cluster point. Next, I need a waypoint that guides the camera over the roof. I'll create one by double-clicking the roof, and then I'll drag it up. And finally, I'll connect the new waypoint to the cluster point for the two rear panoramas and to the default view camera point of the 3D model node. Now the transition from the model's default view to either of the rear panoramas passes over the roof in a smooth arc instead of through the villa. And there's still something else we need to consider. Because the default view camera point now has a connection leading toward the rear panoramas, transitions from the 3D model to the other panorama nodes might also begin following this route. So we need to connect the other groups to the default view camera point too. First, I'll connect the cluster point for the poolside panoramas to the default view camera point. And I also want to group the two panoramas at the top of the stairs. I'll split the connection between them, change the new camera point to a cluster point, and connect that cluster point to the default view camera point. All the tour nodes are now connected through suitable routes. But there's one more option that can help control the camera while it follows these routes. Here we are in the panorama at the top of the stairs, looking away from the house. And when I select a poolside panorama from the menu, the camera travels down the stairs, but the default view of the poolside lounge panorama faces roughly the same direction as our starting view. And so as a result, the camera flies down the stairs backward. And we can change this behavior. To give the middle path more control, I've added another waypoint in the middle of the stairs. In the properties of this waypoint, there's an option called Rotate Camera into Motion Path. So I'll select this option for this waypoint and for the waypoint at the bottom. And again, let's check the output. So starting from the kitchen entrance panorama, I'll select the poolside lounge node from the menu. And now the camera turns to face the direction of travel as it moves down the stairs. And the same happens when it travels back up. So to recap, camera points and the connections between them let you build a network of routes through a 3D model. The player uses this network to calculate the shortest available route between tour nodes, just like a navigation system calculating a route between destinations. Waypoints guide the camera around obstacles and can also control its direction during the transition. Cluster points group camera points that should share the same routes without affecting the camera path themselves. The default view camera point lets you define routes between the 3D model node and the panoramas in the tour. Together, these tools help create smooth transitions that avoid passing through the 3D model. Now, there are a few more options for controlling the motion path and influencing how the shortest route is calculated, and we'll cover those in a future tutorial. And until then, thanks for watching.